to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for the results he achieved in an international context marked by several grave crises and a fragile, tottering global economy. I wish him every success and good health as he discharges his second mandate. I also wish to thank the government and the people of the United States of America, particularly those of the City of New York, for the welcome and unparalleled hospitality we have been shown. Excellencies, Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this 76th session of the General Assembly is being held at a time when Burundi will celebrate the 60th anniversary of its independence and of its accession to the United Nations family. That celebration will be held next year. Consequently, it is the time to recall that the UN has played a major role in Burundi's history because since the end of the First World War, from the end of the First World War, Burundi was managed under the aegis of the League of Nations and then the United Nations. Poor administration of the colonial period had negative consequences for Burundi, which brought with them, at the very dawn of independence, social conflicts and several massacres whose wounds still struggle to heal. As the central theme of our general debate highlights, we do indeed need to return hope to our citizens. In Burundi, this means returning hope to our citizens not only in the face of the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also returning hope to our citizens following the consequences of the series of crises that have unfolded in our country in full impunity. Consequently, this regular session of the General Assembly arrives for me at an opportune moment for my country, Burundi, because it provides us with a pleasant opportunity to share with this illustrious assembly the significant progress made by Burundi on the national, regional, and international stage. As things stand, the restoration of peace, security, stability, and social cohesion is a reality in Burundi. The only enemy which remains a threat to citizens, in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is an enemy common to us all, is poverty. Alongside all our citizens, we have taken up the fight against poverty in order to achieve our ultimate goal, the well-being of Burundi's people. To achieve that goal, we have pinpointed a number of priorities, which we have enshrined in the roadmap entitled the Burundi National Development Plan 2018-2027. This is an ambitious and transformative program which could well expedite the socio-economic development process which has been underway since 2018. Allow me first to turn to good governance and social justice. To achieve these goals, the fight against corruption, misappropriation, and the fight against impunity are among the priorities of a government known to be responsible and hard-working. As regards the fight against impunity and the prevention of social conflicts, Burundi has honed local justice mechanisms in order to allow all Burundi's people to have quick and equal access to equitable justice. Moreover, efforts have been made to ensure that we have a genuinely independent and impartial judiciary. We have sought to achieve this goal by rendering the Superior Council of the Judiciary operational. We should underscore here that as part of correcting the grave defects of the past, the government of Burundi is currently leading a process of transitional justice in order to aid all victims in Burundi. As part of managing the security situation, we wish to give particular emphasis to the issue of terrorism. Where this matter is concerned, Mr. President, it cannot be denied that success has been achieved. However, at the same time, we do need to humbly acknowledge that we are far from having developed a common, adequate and effective strategy to eradicate this scourge. In strategic terms, of course, terrorism cannot be justified. I remain convinced that beyond the military action that is necessary, the effective fight against terrorism involves fighting against radicalization, whose breeding ground is ignorance, poverty, youth unemployment, and illiteracy. The UN should undertake initiatives to combat poverty and issue strict sanctions against terrorist groups and all those who support them. As far as we're concerned, we are concerned by the proliferation of terrorism in the sub-region, whose leaders, such as the leaders of the ADF and the Tabara network, are located in the east of the DRC. They recruit young unemployed people and blindly kill peaceful innocent citizens. We're particularly worried about these networks. I remain convinced that these groups constitute a threat not only for our region but also for humankind as a whole. Consequently, we must pool our strengths and fight against terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. And we believe that this fight must be conducted with a greater sense of determination and greater solidarity. It is against this backdrop that since 2007, my country has made available to the United Nations Organization and the African Union troops and police to contribute to restoring security and allowing peace to flower in certain countries who need this to be the case, such as Somalia and the Central African Republic. As regards human rights issues, Burundi firmly believes that human rights must be protected by clear good governance mechanisms, clear security and clear equitable justice mechanisms. As part of monitoring the implementation of the principles of human rights protection, the international community must accede to the fundamental principles of universality, transparency, impartiality, non-selectivity, non-politicization, and objectiveness. It must also reject a policy of double standards when dealing with human rights issues. In this regard, Burundi believes that the best way to promote and protect human rights is to work driven forward by cooperation, dialogue, technical assistance, and capacity building, and the strengthening of national mechanisms which focus on human rights issues. We'd like to take this opportunity to call upon certain partners, namely those within the United Nations Human Rights Council, to properly, fairly and responsibly interpret Burundi's efforts alongside the United Nations and to give them their proper weight. Any act looking to single out Burundi by placing it under special human rights mechanisms is quite simply counterproductive. As you are aware, Burundi has national mechanisms which are able to defend, promote and protect human rights. We have the Independent National Human Rights Commission that has just reclaimed its A status. We also have the National Observatory for the Prevention and Eradication of Genocide, War Crimes and Other Crimes Against Humanity, and we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the National Council for National Unity, the Lands and Other Goods Commission, and the Ombudsman. In practice, the government has focused and does focus on the protection of human rights, the respect of democratic principles, and the freedoms of opinion, expression, and of the press. a great deal of work has been done thanks to the institution of a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue between political parties, media and public authorities. This process of dialogue has allowed us to open a number of media institutions that had been closed during the skirmishes and insurrection of 2015. We've also freed more than 5,000 prisoners by way of presidential partners. We've seen the participation of political parties and civil society in the management of the country's social and political life. Mr. President, Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Turning now to socio-economic issues, Burundi, like other countries, cannot achieve development without resolving issues of healthcare, education, and the management of particular social groups such as young people, women, vulnerable peoples, and those suffering from poverty. As far as healthcare is concerned, the COVID-19 pandemic has arrived in addition to other illnesses raging throughout the country, such as malaria, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and many others which are of concern to the government of Burundi. As regards the COVID-19 pandemic, since the arrival of the first cases of the pandemic, Burundi has taken preventative and response measures, and all of our strategies have made it possible to keep our positivity rate under 3% and to avoid high prevalence of serious COVID cases. However, the complex nature of the virus means that all the nations of the world must engage in more research and show greater displays of genius to find a solidarity-based, collective and sustainable solution, even lasting solution to this pandemic which is sowing chaos throughout humankind. In the same vein, Burundi is appealing for international solidarity to aid citizens suffering from other illnesses, such as those cited above, which hinder their attempts to ensure their economic development. With this in mind, the government of Burundi has a policy of free healthcare for children under 5 and for women who give birth in public hospitals and clinics. Moreover, we have committed to providing each commune with at least one hospital to guarantee that healthcare is never far away from the Burundian people. As part of this effective economic development, our priority is first and foremost food and security. We're aiming to ensure that every mouth has food and every citizen has the income necessary to allow it to meet other basic needs. Consequently, the state of Burundi has committed to supporting local cooperatives as they fight against poverty in all areas of the country. This policy has made Burundi one of the few countries that does not import foodstuffs. Our other priority is education. Education for all is a principle enshrined in the United Nations agenda, and my country finds education for all to be a prerequisite for sustainable development and its agenda. We have guaranteed free basic education to allow every child to attend school, whatever his or her social status. It is in this same vein that we decided to equip every local authority with a school and a teacher training school. We have also looked to and continue to look to reform our education system to provide people with technical and professional training. This will allow us to have young people that are technically capable and multi-skilled and therefore able to conduct economic activity in all sectors. As regards social protection, here we're looking at issues of youth employability, the employability of women, and improving the living conditions of persons in vulnerable situations. In order to achieve these goals, we're encouraging young people to demonstrate imagination, to launch their own development projects. However, at the same time, Burundi has launched a far-reaching program for economic empowerment and youth employment. And we've created the Youth Investment Bank and the Women Investment Bank. Moreover, in order to achieve these goals, where employment and development are concerned, the state of Burundi has the Stimulus Guarantee and Support Fund, the FIGA. This provides guarantees for lucrative projects launched and managed by young people and women. In addition to the aforementioned, Burundi is also focusing on the repatriation of refugees and the care of retired persons. Thanks to peace and security that have now returned to the country, Burundi's refugees and political actors are returning en masse to the country and are welcomed with love and dignity. Between July 2020 and today, more than 75,000 refugees have voluntarily returned to the country. Moreover, we have 50,000 Burundian people that have returned, not doing so under the aegis of the United Nations. Regarding retired persons, our primary aim here is to care for older persons in general by guaranteeing them medical care and improving their pensions. To return hope to all citizens, the government this year launched a national program for peace enhancement, social stability, and the promotion of economic growth. This program, I'm sure, will enjoy the support of all Burundi's development partners to boost the socio-economic development of our country, to enhance peace, and to guarantee Burundi's citizens hope after protracted periods of conflict. Another area on which we must all focus if we are to achieve sustainable development, and an area to which Burundi attaches great importance, is environmental protection. It has acceded to around 20 international conventions in the field. In this context, Burundi is doing everything it can to mobilize financing for projects linked to biodiversity, water filtration, soil protection, the protection of the ozone layer, and the eradication of organic pollutants, namely through its ambitious project Ue Burundi Rombaye, which means Burundi covered end to end. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of diplomacy and cooperation, Burundi has committed to normalizing and promoting friendly relations and a relationship of cooperation with its bilateral and multilateral partners. It has committed to reclaiming its rightful place in the family of nations. On this matter, my country once again commends the historic decision of the United Nations Security Council and of the African Union Peace and Security Council to withdraw Burundi from their political agendas, by way of recognizing that the country has returned to peace, security, and lasting stability. Moreover, Burundi welcomes progress already made in the process of normalizing its friendly relations and its relationship of cooperation with the European Union and its member states, and this through a political dialogue undertaken in a constructive spirit and on the basis of respect between the two parties. Where the continent is concerned, our country is delighted to have ratified the agreement creating the African Continental Free Trade Area. The ultimate goal of this area is to integrate all 55 states of the African Union within one free trade bloc. All of this will achieve the goals outlined in Agenda 2063, which aims to create a continental market with the free movement of people, goods and services, so crucial for the strengthening of economic integration. Consequently, Burundi, alongside Tanzania and the Democratic Republic of Congo, has placed itself in a better position to achieve all the aforementioned goals by launching the railway project which will link the port of Dar es Salaam to Burundi and the east of DRC. Before concluding, Mr. President, On an international level, Burundi supports the action undertaken by the United Nations Secretary-General to promote United Nations reform in order to breathe new life into this common organization and to render it more effective, more efficient, more accountable, and closer to the world's people. And we enthusiastically welcome his report on the common agenda, which he believes to be the starting point for our joint efforts. With this in mind, given that we are the only continent not represented in the group of permanent members of the Security Council, and given that we are, as a continent, underrepresented in the category of non-permanent members, Africa continues to weather the historic injustice of being excluded from this crucially important body for us all. To conclude, Mr. President, the state of Burundi reiterates its staunch commitment to the principles and values enshrined in the United Nations Charter, such as the sovereign equality of states, territorial integrity, non-aggression, political independence, and the resolution of disputes by peaceful means. Moreover, the state of Burundi renews its faith in fundamental human rights, in social justice, in dignity, in the value of human beings, in the equality of men and women in all their rights, as well as in the equality of nations. I thank you for your kind attention. May God bless you all. Many thanks indeed.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Burundi for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luis Alberto Arce Catacora, Constitutional President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Luis Alberto Arce Catacora, Constitutional President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, fellow President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Abdullah Shahid, Brother Secretary General Antonio Guterres, fellow heads of state and government, ministers of foreign affairs, and delegates present in the room. First of all, allow me to hail your election as President of this Assembly, as well as I would like to congratulate the Secretary General on being re-elected for a second term. We find ourselves in the most important forum created by humankind following the Second World War. It was designed as a forum to debate, to reflect, and to seek effective solutions to the various crises that our planet is confronting. The United Nations organization was designed based on the principle of legal equality of states, and to which can be added political equality. It was created to avoid having our planet once again experience armed clashes among states that endanger world peace that we all aspire to. Now, these goals have not been fully met because the ambition to control access to natural resources and to dominate entire nations have continued to lead to direct armed invasions, criminal blockades, and indirect interventions in the military, political, economic, and even the media spheres. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how fragile our societies and states are. It has created unprecedented negative impacts in such areas as healthcare, the economy, education, among other areas. It has put at risk the achievement of the goals of the 2030 agenda within the established timetable. Now, in addition to the multi-dimensional crisis of capitalism, the economic crisis, social, environmental, food, and energetic crisis, we can now add a sanitary crisis. At the same time, this crisis has clearly illustrated that inequality between the main capitalist countries and those on the periphery continues. Euphemistically, these two groups are denominated developed and developing countries. The growth in poverty and extreme poverty and the inequitable concentration of vaccines has been condemned by the World Health Organization itself. According to available data, to date, only 30% of the global population that requires vaccines has received at least one dose of an anti-COVID-19 vaccine. And barely 15.5% is fully vaccinated. At the same time, only 1.1% of the population in low-income countries has received at least one dose. Capitalism has transformed all areas of social life into merchandise. And health has not managed to escape its tentacles. Medical science must be at the service of humankind without any kind of geographical, political, social discrimination or discrimination based on nationality. Access to vaccines must be considered as a human right. We cannot remain indifferent, or even less to seek to profit from health at a time of pandemic. We are fully convinced that the pandemic could be overcome with broader coverage of vaccination. The World Health Organization has determined that when 70% of this goal is reached, 70% of vaccination, we could overcome the pandemic. However, access to vaccines, especially countries on the periphery, is limited. In this context, we believe that it is important, that the following is important. Transnational companies that produce medication should lift their patents and share their knowledge and technology for the production of COVID-19 vaccines. And through our joint efforts, we can ensure immediate access to vaccines to all people in all countries of the world. Second, that supranational organizations such as the United Nations and governments work in solidarity to avoid the hoarding of vaccines and promote the universal, just, equitable, and timely access to vaccines, as well as to medications and medical products in order to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. Current circumstances created by the pandemic are in fact an appeal to solidarity and international cooperation among brethren nations in favor of life. In the fight against COVID-19 around our planet, thousands and thousands of healthcare workers fulfilled their role, and we would like to pay tribute to them, and we would like to express our gratitude to them for their work. In Europe, in spite of its problems, countries managed to reach an agreement and have allocated billions of dollars to reactivate its economy. The United States, similarly, has managed to reach a consensus amongst its politicians to allocate billions towards its economic recovery. However, unfortunately, in Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa, the states and governments do not have organizations that are focused on the fight for life. Quite to the contrary, organizations such as the Organization of American States, OAS, divide us, promote coups d'etats, and generate instability. Fellow President, the COVID-19 crisis has also demonstrated vulnerabilities and inequalities in the financial system and in the global economy. In a closely interconnected world, it is essential to deepen solidarity, complementarity, and to respond to the needs of our peoples in the post-pandemic context. To do this, it's necessary to strengthen integration and cooperation so that we can confront the multidimensional impact on our economies, on our industries, and on our capacity to achieve food security based on our sovereignty. In this context, it is essential to rebuild our economies in order to ensure social protection and health care. In other words, we must safeguard and protect workers, farmers, indigenous peoples, original peoples, micro and small businesses, and entrepreneurs. We should protect them just as we protect banks, large corporations, or transnational corporations. To achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, it is essential that we confront the risks that the pandemic has put before us. Bearing this in mind, we are analyzing and proposing comprehensive solutions to the vulnerability that has been generated by indebtedness in developing countries compared their debt to the main capitalist countries and financial institutions. With this in mind, comprehensive measures are important that international financial organizations could implement based on a sustainable vision and that do not lead to additional burdens or further in-debt beneficiary states. States must put priority on eradicating extreme poverty, reducing inequality in all its dimensions. States should focus on access to basic services for their population. And we must assume, in a responsible way, the challenge of building a future based on solidarity, complementarity, sustainability, and cooperation among peoples. However, we will not make much progress in diminishing or eliminating these problems, such as poverty, as long as we continue in the current economic global order, which is unjust. Wherever we see injustice, and which continues to prevail in and impose inequality in international trade and puts obstacles towards industrialization. Furthermore, we have to continue to highlight that, unfortunately, the digital gap persists, and the rapid progress in digital technologies and electronic trade, e-trade, has become an instrument that could help economic recovery. However, the digital divide prevents these benefits from being shared equitably. And when this happens, digital technologies and e-trade become instruments to merely consolidate this unjust global order. Bearing this in mind, the plurinational state of Bolivia is proposing to move forward on reaching agreements with multilateral financial organizations to refinance or to ease the external debt at the global level, and to support social policies for populations in a situation of vulnerability, and to do this based on an approach of sustainable and comprehensive development. By the same token, it's important for the various international financial mechanisms to activate concessional lending, that they design and implement long-term and medium-term measures to ensure the achievement of the 2030 development agenda. Fellow President, our planet, our common home, our Mother Earth, still is suffering the terrible consequences of consumerism and excessive depredation of natural resources. And once again, we believe that the capitalist system is one of the main causes of the climate crisis. Based on the cosmovision of indigenous peoples, there is an interdependence between human beings and nature. This is why, as a state, we are promoting a new model of coexistence for the well-being of our people, which our people call living well. It promotes a change in the approach to life, leaving behind predation, irrational competition, and excessive consumerism, and this insatiable surge to accumulate profits at the cost of Mother Earth and the life on our planet. This approach, this cosmovision of our indigenous peoples, is valid for all the peoples of the world, because what capitalism in fact is putting at risk is humanity itself and nature itself. Now, to take the path towards living well implies that our public policies and ways of life be in harmony and in balance with nature. We must restore our relationship with Mother Earth, because what's at stake is our survival as a species. The growing threat represented by non-economic risks for financial and macroeconomic stability. I'm thinking of the climate crisis, obviously. This has demonstrated the need to formulate policies that help in us move towards a new economic model. Now, consistent with our thinking, we have developed a Bolivian vision for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are proposing that all states parties meet in the framework of the COP26 in Glasgow, work together, and we would like to suggest the following for this. Based on this. Number one, the only real solution to eliminate the increase in temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires distributing the carbon budget among countries based on the criteria of climate justice and based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Number two, the main capitalist countries must assume the climate debt and the historic compensation toward the rest of countries of the world through financial cooperation, transfer of technologies, and the development of capacities, thus implementing the agreements that have been signed to date. Number three, it's essential to incorporate the knowledge, practices, and experiences of indigenous peoples and nations in building societies and ecosystems that are resilient to climate change. Number four, there's an urgent need to strengthen and step up efforts of countries to fight the climate crisis. In particular, the approaches that are not based on the carbon market. Efforts should be effective in reducing domestic greenhouse gas emissions. We are convinced of the urgent need to reform the global architecture that guides financial, investment, trade, development, environmental, and social policies around the world. Now, in the same context, we welcome the holding of the Summit on Food Systems, because the health and the life of humanity depend on their access to food. We must strengthen and acknowledge the important contribution to the economy and preservation of nature that small-scale farmers and indigenous populations make. By the same token, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate this Assembly for the very important decision adopted in declaring a decade of indigenous languages, which will begin next year. Languages transmit culture, knowledge, skills, and the history of peoples. This is why it's important for our states throughout in these years and in the future to promote actions to revitalize and strengthen indigenous languages, which are part and parcel of the cultural wealth of humankind. Fellow President, the charter of our organization is the main reference in safeguarding international law that governs relations among our states. For this reason, the United Nations organization has a preeminent role, especially in safeguarding human rights. This is why it is inconceivable that powerful countries take actions and measures that are unilateral and that generate negative effects against the right to life, to health, to food, and to education of millions of people. Just has been stated in this General Assembly in many opportunities, these coercive measures in fact, are applied extraterritorially and unilaterally. This is not only immoral, but in fact goes against international law and contravenes the Charter itself of the United Nations. It weakens multilateralism. These measures are even more to be condemned and rejected when they intentionally and directly affect the exercise and enjoyment of human rights. Human rights are inherent. They're inviolable. They cannot be double standards. Access to vaccines, medicine, medical products, and essential goods such as food cannot be subjected to political interests, nor should the right to life or the right to health should be used as a political mechanism to put pressure at the expense of the lives of millions of people that depend on this, especially in the time of pandemic. We reject any unilateral measure aimed at preventing our countries from exercising their right to determine freely their political, economic, and social systems. A clear demonstration of the application of unilateral measures is the inhumane and criminal commercial and financial blockade against Cuba, which puts at risk the lives of more than 11 million citizens of this country in the midst of a pandemic. It's a crime against humanity, but at the same time, it is a regrettable example of how the decisions of this Assembly are not implemented and complied with by certain countries. It is frustrating to admit that year after year,